The psychological effect on the populace was profound. Witnessing such a spectacle instilled a deep-seated fear of the Inquisition's power and a strong incentive to conform. People learned to be outwardly pious, to avoid any behavior that might be deemed suspicious, and to denounce others if necessary to protect themselves. The auto da fe was a powerful tool for social control, shaping behavior and belief through terror. You'd find yourself walking home, your mind replaying the images, your heart still pounding, vowing to yourself that you would never, ever give them a reason to look at you. The initial target of the Inquisition was primarily the conversos. Many had converted sincerely, seeking to integrate into Christian society, but others had done so out of necessity, to avoid persecution or expulsion. These new Christians were often wealthier and more educated, holding prominent positions in society, which, ironically, only fueled resentment and suspicion among some old Christians. You might have a neighbor, a successful merchant, whose family converted generations ago. Suddenly, their success, their quiet traditions, even their slightly different accent, become points of suspicion. You start to notice how people look at them, how conversations quiet when they approach. It's a subtle shift at first, like the air growing colder before a storm. Even for those who were merely subjected to public penance, the shame was immense. Their sanbenitos were often hung in churches as a permanent record of their heresy, a constant reminder to the community and to their descendants. Their families would be ostracized, their businesses ruined, and their names forever associated with the stain of heresy. It was a punishment that extended beyond the individual, affecting generations. It's like having a permanent scarlet letter sewn onto your family crest, visible to everyone, forever. The power of the Inquisition was immense, and it operated largely outside the traditional legal structures. It had its own courts, its own prisons, and its own rules of evidence, or lack thereof. You couldn't face your accusers, and often, you didn't even know who they were. Imagine being accused of a crime, but the only information you get is a vague charge and a list of your supposed sins, whispered to you in a dark cell. It's like being forced to play a game of charades where you don't know the word, and the consequences of guessing wrong are, shall we say, severe? The auto da fe also served as a bonding experience for the old Christians who witnessed it. It reinforced their sense of collective identity and their belief in the righteousness of their faith. They were the pure ones, the defenders of orthodoxy, and the spectacle of punishment served to solidify their position. It was a grim form of community building, forged in the fires of intolerance. One of the common historical facts about the Spanish Inquisition is its use of the Edict of Grace. This was a period, usually 30 to 40 days, at the beginning of an inquisitorial campaign in a new area. During this time, people were encouraged to come forward and confess their own heresies, or, more chillingly, to denounce others. If you confessed, you might receive a lighter sentence, perhaps a fine or public penance, rather than the full wrath of the tribunal. But here's the catch: once you confessed, you were marked. Your name was on a list, your lineage tainted, and you became a permanent suspect. It was a brilliant, insidious psychological trap. Confess and live in perpetual fear, or deny and face the full, terrifying might of the Inquisition. Many, out of desperation or genuine fear, chose to confess, unknowingly sealing their own fate for generations to come. Historians still debate whether the public actually accepted and supported the auto da fes, or whether they attended them out of fear and obligation. Some have suggested that a significant portion of the population genuinely believed that these ceremonies were necessary to purify society and protect the faith, and attended them out of devotion. However, others have argued that attendance was often compulsory, and that many people viewed the auto da fes with horror and disgust, although they did not dare to express it publicly. It is clear that they were a powerful tool of social control, regardless of the extent of actual public support. The economic impact of the auto da fe was also significant. The property of the condemned was confiscated, enriching the coffers of the crown and the Inquisition. This provided a financial incentive for the tribunals to find guilt, turning human suffering into a source of revenue. Imagine a government agency that gets paid more for every person they convict. It's a system designed to be self-perpetuating, fueled by fear and greed. An obscure detail, often overlooked, is the Inquisition's meticulous record-keeping. While their methods were brutal, their bureaucracy was surprisingly efficient. They kept detailed dossiers on every suspect, every trial, every confession, and every punishment. These records, sometimes stretching for hundreds of pages, offer a chilling glimpse into the lives of ordinary people caught in this extraordinary machine. You might find a record detailing a woman accused of witchcraft because her cow gave sour milk, or a man denounced for not eating ham on a particular day. These aren't grand conspiracies. They're the mundane tragedies of everyday life, meticulously documented for posterity, like a very depressing library of human suffering. The auto da fe was not a frequent occurrence in every town. It was a major event, often held only a few times a year in larger cities, or less frequently in smaller ones. But the threat of it, the knowledge that it could happen, was always present. This unpredictability added to the pervasive fear of keeping everyone on edge. You never knew when the bells would ring, when the procession would begin, or when someone you knew might be paraded through the streets. The atmosphere of fear was pervasive. You couldn't trust your neighbors, your friends, or even your family. A casual remark, a slight deviation from accepted practice, could be interpreted as a sign of heresy. Did your grandmother light candles on Friday nights? Was that an old Christian custom, or a secret Jewish ritual? The line blurred, and the safest option was often to denounce someone else before they denounced you. It was a social contagion, spreading suspicion and paranoia like wildfire through the tightly knit communities. Imagine trying to explain to your kids why they can't sing that old lullaby anymore, because someone might think it sounds a bit too much like a forbidden tune. The role of the church in these ceremonies was central. Bishops, priests, and members of various religious orders participated, lending their spiritual authority to the proceedings. This emphasized the religious nature of the Inquisition's mission, framing the punishments not as secular justice, but as acts of divine judgment. It was a stark reminder that the power of God, as interpreted by the Inquisition, was absolute and terrifying. The Inquisition's methods were designed to instill terror and enforce conformity. They didn't need to catch every single heretic, they just needed to make everyone think they could be caught. The psychological impact was devastating. People began to self-censor, to perform their faith with exaggerated zeal, to avoid anything that could be misinterpreted. You might see your neighbor, who used to be so jovial, now walking with a perpetual frown, his eyes darting nervously, always looking over his shoulder. It's like everyone is walking on eggshells, except the eggs are filled with nitroglycerin. The auto da fe also served to publicly reconcile those who had confessed and repented. While they still faced penalties, their public act of penance was meant to bring them back into the fold of the church. This offered a glimmer of hope for a path to redemption, albeit one paved with immense suffering and public humiliation. It's like being allowed back into the club, but you have to wear a giant sign that says, "I messed up." The establishment of the Inquisition wasn't a sudden, universally accepted event. There was resistance, particularly from some local authorities, and even some members of the clergy who saw it as an infringement on their traditional rights and jurisdictions. They argued that the existing episcopal courts were sufficient to handle matters of faith. However, the monarchs, with the backing of the Pope, were determined. They saw the Inquisition as a direct extension of royal authority, a way to centralize power and enforce their vision of a unified, religiously pure Spain. This struggle for control, this clash between traditional local power and burgeoning centralized authority, is a fascinating aspect of the Inquisition's early days. The historical records of the auto da fe are chillingly detailed. Notaries meticulously recorded the names of the condemned, their crimes, and their punishments. These records provide invaluable, though often disturbing, insights into the Inquisition's operations and the lives of its victims. They are a testament to the meticulous bureaucracy that underpinned this brutal institution. One of the most significant impacts of the Inquisition, even in its early stages, was on the intellectual life of Spain. The fear of censorship and persecution stifled free thought and inquiry. Scholars became hesitant to explore new ideas, to question established doctrines, or to engage with texts that might be deemed problematic. It was like putting a blanket over a vibrant intellectual fire, slowly suffocating the flames of innovation and critical thinking. The universities, once centers of lively debate, began to turn inward, focusing on dogma rather than discovery. And as the last wisps of smoke dissipate into the evening sky, and the crowds slowly disperse, you are left with a profound sense of unease. The images of the day are burned into your mind, the solemn procession, the faces of the penitents, the terrifying sanbenitos, and the crackling flames. The auto da fe was more than just a punishment. It was a ritual of power, a public declaration of absolute authority, and a chilling reminder that in this world, conformity was not just a suggestion, but a matter of life and death. You walk home in silence, the weight of what you've witnessed pressing down on you, knowing that the shadow of the Inquisition has just grown even darker, even more real. The Inquisition also had a profound economic impact. When someone was accused and convicted, their property was often confiscated. This not only served as a deterrent, but also provided a significant source of revenue for the crown and the Inquisition itself. Imagine being a successful merchant, building a life for your family, only to have it all stripped away because of an anonymous accusation. Your assets are seized, your family is left destitute, and your name is forever tarnished. It's a brutal form of wealth redistribution, where the redistribution always seems to go in one direction. You've witnessed the chilling public spectacle of the auto da fe, the flames and the shame etched into your memory. But the misery inflicted by the Spanish Inquisition wasn't just about spiritual purity or public humiliation. It was also a systematic campaign of economic ruin and social ostracism, designed to dismantle lives and communities, leaving a trail of devastation that stretched far beyond the individual accused. The initial tribunals were set up in Seville, a bustling port city with a large converso population. The first public auto da fe, a ceremony where sentences were read out and punishments carried out, took place there in 1481. This was a chilling preview of what was to come. You might have been among the crowds, drawn by morbid curiosity or forced by social pressure to witness the spectacle. The sight of people, dressed in penitential garments, paraded through the streets, their faces etched with despair, served as a stark warning to anyone who dared to stray from the path of orthodoxy. It was a meticulously choreographed performance of power, designed to terrify and control. Imagine, for a moment, that you are a successful merchant in Seville and you've built your business from the ground up, traded across the Mediterranean, and provided well for your family. Your reputation is your most valuable asset, meticulously cultivated over years of honest dealings. Then the knock comes. You are accused of heresy, perhaps by a jealous competitor or a disgruntled former employee, even if you are eventually acquitted, or given a lighter sentence. The damage has already been done. Your business is in tatters, your credit gone, and your name, once a symbol of trust, is now synonymous with suspicion. It's like having your entire life's work set on fire, not with actual flames, but with the invisible, corrosive acid of public accusation. The role of informers was crucial to the Inquisition's operation. These were individuals, often motivated by religious zeal, personal vendettas, or even the promise of a reward, who would denounce their neighbors to the inquisitors. You could be walking down the street, and someone you've known your whole life, someone you've shared meals with, could be secretly compiling a list of your perceived transgressions. It's a betrayal that cuts deeper than any blade, because it undermines the very fabric of trust within a community. The confiscation of property was a cornerstone of the Inquisition's financial model, and a powerful tool of punishment. When someone was arrested, their assets were immediately seized and inventoried. If they were found guilty, their property, their homes, lands, goods, money, even their clothing and personal effects were permanently confiscated by the Holy Office and the Crown. This wasn't just a punitive measure, it was a significant source of revenue for the Inquisition, funding its operations, its officials, and its vast bureaucracy. It's a rather grim business model, wouldn't you agree? Heresy detection and asset acquisition. Sounds like a very niche, very profitable, and utterly terrifying venture capital firm. Historians still debate whether popular consent to the Inquisition was a significant factor in its initial success, or whether it was sustained primarily by fear and coercion. Some have argued that a significant portion of the population, particularly devout old Christians, genuinely believed in the necessity of the Inquisition to protect the faith and purity of Spain. They may have welcomed it as a tool for eliminating what they saw as spiritual and social threats. Others, however, have argued that this support, if any, was quickly overshadowed by fear and coercion, as the population realized that anyone could be a target. Whatever the case, it is clear that the presence of the Inquisition permanently altered the social and psychological landscape of Spain. The fear wasn't just about being accused yourself, it was about the ripple effect. If a family member was accused, the entire family could be tainted. Their reputation, their social standing, their ability to conduct business, all could be irrevocably damaged. It was a collective punishment, designed to isolate and break down any potential networks of dissent or support. Imagine your cousin, a seemingly devout Christian, suddenly disappearing. You hear whispers, but no one dares to speak openly. You know, deep down, that his fate could easily become yours, or your children's. This economic devastation wasn't limited to the accused. Their families, often entirely innocent, were left destitute. Wives and children, who had relied on the accused for their livelihood, suddenly found themselves without resources. Their homes gone, their futures uncertain. Imagine your family, once comfortable, now begging for scraps, forced to rely on the charity of others, all because of an accusation against one member. The ripple effect of the Inquisition's actions spread far and wide, touching every corner of society. The Inquisition also played a significant role in the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492. While the Inquisition's primary focus was on conversos, the pressure it exerted contributed to the climate of intolerance that ultimately led to the Edict of Expulsion. You can imagine the despair and terror as Jewish families, many of whom had lived in Spain for centuries, were given a stark choice: convert or leave. Most chose to leave, abandoning their homes, their livelihoods, and their heritage, embarking on a perilous journey to an uncertain future. It was a mass exodus, driven by a religious fervor that had spiraled into outright persecution. A common historical fact about the Inquisition's economic impact is that the confiscation of property disproportionately affected the converso. Many conversos were involved in lucrative trades, finance, and professions, having accumulated significant wealth over generations. Their economic success, ironically, made them prime targets. The Inquisition, while ostensibly concerned with faith, effectively served as a mechanism for transferring wealth from new Christians to old Christians and the state. It was a convenient way to eliminate economic rivals under the guise of religious purification. So, as you walk through those sun-drenched streets, the shadow of the Inquisition is growing longer, darker. The laughter of children seems a little less carefree. The conversations of merchants a little more hushed. You find yourself instinctively lowering your voice, choosing your words more carefully, and perhaps, just perhaps, looking at your neighbors with a new, unsettling sense of caution. The air once filled with the promise of a vibrant future now carries the faint, chilling echo of an unseen tribunal, judging every thought, every word, every silent prayer. This is the new reality, and you are living in its unsettling embrace. Beyond direct confiscation, the very process of being investigated or imprisoned by the Inquisition could lead to financial ruin. Legal fees, even for the most rudimentary defense, were exorbitant. Time spent in prison meant lost income and neglected businesses. The sheer uncertainty and social stigma associated with an inquisitorial investigation were often enough to destroy a person's livelihood, even if they were eventually cleared. You might be released, but you'd find your customers gone, your suppliers unwilling to deal with you, and your reputation irrevocably stained. It's like being given a get-out-of-jail-free card, but it comes with a lifetime ban from the game. You felt the chill in the air, the subtle shift in the market's hum, the creeping suspicion that has begun to weave itself into the very fabric of daily life. Now, imagine that subtle chill intensifying, becoming a biting wind, as a single figure rises to embody the very essence of the Inquisition's terrifying power. This is where you meet Tomás de Torquemada, a name that, even centuries later, can send a shiver down the spine. He wasn't just a man, he was the architect of an institution, the unyielding will behind its most brutal manifestations, and the personification of the zealous pursuit of religious purity An obscure detail related to economic ruin is the practice of secret loans, or loans of charity, that some families of the accused would take out to support themselves or to bribe officials. These loans were often made at exorbitant interest rates by unscrupulous individuals who preyed on the desperation of the families. The families, already struggling, would fall deeper into debt, further compounding their misery. It highlights the layers of exploitation that existed around the Inquisition, where even the most vulnerable were targeted for profit. It's a bit like a medieval payday loan scheme, except the consequences of defaulting were far more severe than a bad credit score. Torquemada enters your world not with a grand fanfare, but with the quiet, methodical precision of a master craftsman. He's a Dominican friar, austere and unyielding, with eyes that seem to pierce through any pretense. Appointed as the Grand Inquisitor for Castile and Aragon in 1483, his arrival marks a significant turning point. Before him, the Inquisition was a collection of regional tribunals, somewhat fragmented. Torquemada's genius, if you can call it that, lay in his ability to centralize and standardize its operations, turning it into a truly formidable nationwide force. It's like going from a loose collection of neighborhood watch groups to a highly organized, nationwide surveillance agency, complete with its own special forces, and you're just trying to buy some bread without looking suspicious. Social ostracism was another devastating consequence. Even if you avoided the ultimate penalty, the public shame of being investigated or condemned by the Inquisition was immense. The San Benito, as we discussed, was a powerful symbol of this. Even if it wasn't hung in a church, the memory of your public penance, or simply the whispers of your past, would follow you. You would be shunned by your community, excluded from social gatherings, and treated with suspicion. Your children might struggle to find suitable marriage partners, their prospects dimmed by the stain of their family's history. Under Torquemada's guidance, the Inquisition's reach expanded dramatically. New tribunals were established in cities across Spain, each staffed by inquisitors, notaries, jailers, and a host of other officials. You might suddenly find a new, imposing building in your town, its windows dark, its doors heavy, and a constant stream of somber figures entering and exiting. This isn't a new bakery or a lively tavern, it's the local branch of the Inquisition, and its presence casts a long, unsettling shadow over your daily routines. Imagine trying to live a normal life after being publicly shamed. You walk into the market, and conversations stop. People avert their eyes. Children are pulled away from you. The once familiar faces now look at you with a mixture of fear, judgment, and perhaps pity. You are a pariah, marked by an invisible brand that everyone can see. It's a loneliness that cuts deeper than any physical pain, because it isolates you from the very human connections that make life bearable. Torquemada was driven by an unwavering conviction that he was doing God's work. He genuinely believed that heresy was a mortal sin, a spiritual plague that threatened the very soul of Spain. And like any good plague doctor, he was prepared to use the most drastic measures to eradicate it. His methods were systematic, efficient, and utterly ruthless. He developed detailed procedures for arrests, interrogations, and trials, leaving little room for individual discretion or mercy. It's the kind of meticulous planning you'd admire in a highly successful business. If that business wasn't in the business of human suffering, the concept of limpieza de sangre, purity of blood, which we touched upon earlier, played a crucial role in this social ostracism. Even if your family had converted generations ago and lived devout Christian lives, any hint of Jewish or Muslim ancestry could lead to discrimination. This wasn't just about religious belief, it was about the insidious power of prejudice and the creation of a social hierarchy based on perceived purity of lineage. You could be the most pious person in Spain, but if your great-grandmother was a conversa, you might still find doors closed to you. A common historical fact about Torquemada is his role in refining and intensifying the use of torture. While torture was not invented by the Inquisition and was used by secular courts across Europe, Torquemada codified its application within the inquisitorial process. It wasn't about extracting truth, but about extracting confession. The logic was chillingly simple: if you confessed, you were saved, even if that salvation came at the cost of unimaginable pain and a public humiliation that would follow you to your grave. If you didn't confess, you were clearly unrepentant, and thus deserved the harshest penalties. You might hear whispers of the strappado, where your hands are tied behind your back and you're hoisted into the air, or the water torture, where you're forced to swallow vast quantities of water until your stomach distends. These aren't just stories, they are the grim realities of the Inquisition's chambers, meticulously applied under Torquemada's directives. This emphasis on pure blood had a chilling effect on social mobility and opportunity. Public offices, positions in the church, military commands, and even entry into certain guilds or universities often required proof of limpieza de sangre. This meant that even talented and capable individuals from converso or morisco backgrounds were systematically excluded from positions of power and influence, regardless of their actual faith or abilities. It was a glass ceiling made of ancestral suspicion, and it was almost impossible to break through. Imagine the psychological toll this takes. You're accused, you're isolated, and then you're subjected to a process designed to break your will. The inquisitors are relentless, often working in shifts, asking the same questions over and over, twisting your words, and presenting fabricated evidence. They tell you that confession is your only path to salvation, that God already knows your sins, and that only through admitting them can you find peace. It's a terrifying blend of religious manipulation and psychological warfare, designed to make you question your own sanity, let alone your innocence. You start to wonder if maybe, just maybe, you did do something wrong, even if you can't remember what it was. It's like being gaslit by an entire institution, and the stakes are, well, eternal. The Inquisition also fostered a culture of fear that discouraged charity and assistance towards the accused or their families. Helping someone tainted by the Inquisition could itself draw suspicion. People became wary of offering aid, fearing that they too might be implicated. This left the victims of the Inquisition even more isolated and vulnerable, cut off from the very social safety nets that might have existed in other circumstances. It's like being caught in a quicksand pit, and everyone standing around is too afraid to throw you a rope. An obscure detail about Torquemada is his obsession with purity of lineage, known as limpieza de sangre, purity of blood. While the Inquisition officially targeted heresy, Torquemada's policies increasingly focused on the ancestry of conversos. Even if your family had been Christian for generations, if there was any trace of Jewish or Muslim ancestry in your past, you were considered suspect. This wasn't just about religious belief, it was about racial and social discrimination. Enshrined in law, you might have a perfectly devout neighbor, a pillar of the community, whose great-grandmother was a conversa. Suddenly, that distant relative, long dead, becomes a stain on their entire family, making them vulnerable to accusation. It's like being judged for something your great-great-great-aunt did, which, let's be honest, is a bit much. Even for a family reunion. Historians still debate whether the extent of the economic devastation wrought by the Inquisition was a deliberate element of its strategy to consolidate the power of the crown and the old Christian nobility, or whether it was simply an unintended consequence of its pursuit of heresy. Some have argued that the systematic confiscation of property, especially from wealthy conversos, was a deliberate way to transfer wealth and disrupt competing economic networks. Others, however, that argue that while the Inquisition benefited financially, its primary goal was still religion, and that the economic devastation was a side effect rather than a primary goal. It is clear that the economic consequences were enormous, whatever the original intentions. The social fabric of Spain was deeply affected. Trust, once a fundamental component of community life, eroded under the weight of suspicion and denunciation. Neighbors turned on neighbors, and families were torn apart by internal divisions and fear. The bonds of kinship and friendship were strained, as people became hesitant to associate with anyone who might be seen as a risk. It was a social experiment in paranoia, and it succeeded beyond anyone's wildest nightmares. This emphasis on limpieza de sangre created a profound social anxiety. People began to meticulously trace their family trees, desperately trying to prove their old Christian heritage. Certificates of limpieza de sangre became highly prized, almost like a passport to respectability. Without one, your opportunities for advancement in the church, the government, or even certain guilds could be severely limited. You might find yourself subtly excluded from social gatherings, Your children's marriage prospects dwindling, all because of a genealogical whisper. It's a chilling reminder that fear can be weaponized, not just against individuals, but against entire bloodlines. The impact on marriage and family life was particularly brutal. If a family member was condemned, it could be almost impossible for other family members to marry into respectable families. The stain of heresy was hereditary, a mark that could follow a family for generations. This created a sense of despair and hopelessness for many, as their future, and the future of their children, seemed irrevocably compromised. Imagine being told that your children and their children will carry a mark of shame, simply because of something your great-grandfather was accused of. Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights, maybe light a very, very metaphorical candle, and journey back to a time when the very air you breathed felt thick with suspicion. Imagine, if you will, the warm, sun-drenched streets of late 15th century Spain. You're strolling through a bustling market, the scent of spices mingling with the aroma of freshly baked bread. Children are laughing, merchants are hawking their wares, and the vibrant tapestry of daily life unfolds around you. But beneath this seemingly idyllic surface, a new, chilling institution is beginning to unfurl its dark wings, ready to cast a shadow so profound it would stretch for centuries. This isn't a story for the faint of heart, or for those who enjoy a good night's sleep undisturbed by existential dread. In fact, if you were actually there, you probably wouldn't survive the night, let alone the entire narrative. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Even after the Inquisition's power waned, the social and economic scars remained. Families whose ancestors had been condemned struggled for centuries to regain their standing. The concept of limpieza de sangre persisted in various forms long after the formal inquisitorial process ended, influencing social attitudes and opportunities well into the modern era. It's a long, lingering hangover from a very bad party, and the headache just won't go away. Torquemada's influence extended to the very heart of the royal court. He was Queen Isabella's confessor, a position that gave him unparalleled access and influence. He wasn't just an administrator, he was a spiritual advisor to the most powerful figures in Spain, shaping their policies and reinforcing their own religious zeal. Imagine having a personal spiritual coach who also happens to be the head of the secret police. It certainly makes you think twice about complaining about the royal dinner menu. The Inquisition also created a class of impoverished former prisoners and their families who became a burden on society. Many were forced into begging or menial labor, struggling to survive in a world that had cast them out. Their plight served as a constant, visible reminder of the Inquisition's power, a living testament to the consequences of falling under its gaze. You might see them on the streets, their eyes haunted, their clothes ragged, and you would quicken your pace, grateful that it wasn't you. Wasn't. The Grand Inquisitor's power was so absolute that he could even overrule local bishops and secular authorities. If a local official tried to protect an accused person, or questioned the Inquisition's methods, they could find themselves under scrutiny. This centralized authority was a key factor in the Inquisition's effectiveness. It meant there was no escape, no local refuge from its reach. You couldn't appeal to your mayor or your local priest. The ultimate authority lay with Torquemada and his tribunals. The intellectual and cultural life also suffered from this social ostracism. Those who were deemed suspect, or who had converso ancestry, were often excluded from academic institutions or artistic circles. This led to a brain drain, as many talented individuals either fled Spain or were stifled within its borders. The vibrant intellectual exchange that had characterized medieval Spain diminished, replaced by a more rigid and dogmatic approach to knowledge. It's like draining all the color out of a painting, leaving only shades of gray. The sheer scale of the Inquisition under Torquemada was unprecedented. While exact numbers are debated, it's estimated that thousands of people were tried during his tenure, and a significant number were condemned to death, often by burning at the stake. These were not just isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic campaign to root out perceived heresy. The air in many towns would have been thick with the smoke of these executions, a constant, horrifying reminder of the Inquisition's power. The fear of economic ruin and social ostracism was a powerful motivator for confession, even for the innocent. Many chose to confess to minor heresies, or even fabricated ones, hoping to receive a lighter sentence and avoid the complete destruction of their lives and families. They would trade their truth for a chance at survival, a desperate gamble in a game where the odds were always stacked against them. The psychological impact of Torquemada's reign was immense. People lived in a state of constant vigilance, terrified of making a misstep, of saying the wrong thing, of attracting the attention of the dreaded inquisitors. Self-censorship became a way of life. You learned to keep your thoughts to yourself, to avoid controversial topics, and to perform your religious duties with an almost theatrical devotion. It's like living in a house where every wall has ears, and every shadow hides a pair of watchful eyes. Historians still debate whether Torquemada was a simple fanatic, driven by blind faith, or whether he was a brilliant political strategist, using the Inquisition to consolidate the power of the crown and himself. Some have suggested that he genuinely believed he was saving souls and protecting Spain from spiritual decay. They point to his personal asceticism and devotion to religious principles. Others, however, argue that he skillfully exploited religious fears to build a powerful empire for himself and the Catholic kings, eliminating political and economic opponents under the guise of religious purification. Whatever his motives, the result was a reign of terror and suffering. The Inquisition, under Torquemada, also developed a sophisticated network of spies and informers. These weren't just zealous citizens, they were often paid agents, infiltrating communities, listening to conversations, and reporting any suspicious activity. You might find yourself wondering if that friendly face in the market, the one who always has a kind word, is secretly taking notes on your family's habits. It's a level of paranoia that would make even the most seasoned conspiracy theorist feel a little overwhelmed. And as the sun sets, casting long shadows across the streets, you reflect on the invisible chains that bind this society. It's not just the physical prisons, but the economic and social ones, built from fear, prejudice, and the relentless pursuit of conformity. The Spanish Inquisition didn't just target souls, it systematically dismantled lives, leaving behind a legacy of poverty, shame, and a profound sense of loss. You realize that in this world, misery isn't just a fleeting emotion, it's a carefully constructed system, designed to make life truly, utterly miserable. The process of accusation itself was terrifying. An anonymous denunciation was often enough to trigger an investigation. You wouldn't know who accused you, or what the specific charges were, until you were already in the Inquisition's custody. This anonymity protected the accusers from retaliation, but left the accused utterly defenseless. It's like being thrown into a boxing ring, blindfolded, with no idea who your opponent is or where the punches are coming from. You've seen how the Inquisition's shadow stretched over every aspect of life, from the whispers in the market to the public shame of the auto da fe, and how it systematically dismantled lives through economic ruin and social ostracism. Now, let's turn our gaze to something less tangible but equally devastating, the chilling effect the Inquisition had on the very act of thinking, on the pursuit of knowledge, and on the vibrant intellectual life that had once characterized Spain. You are about to experience the profound silence that descends when ideas themselves become dangerous, when curiosity is a sin, and when the light of inquiry is systematically extinguished. Once arrested, you would be taken to the Inquisition's secret prisons. These weren't like typical secular jails. They were often designed for psychological torment as much as physical confinement. Solitary cells, constant darkness, and the absence of any contact with the outside world were common. The goal was to disorient you, to break your spirit, and to make you desperate for confession. Imagine weeks, months, or even years passing in utter isolation, with only the gnawing fear of the unknown for company. You might start talking to yourself, or to the rats, just for the sound of a voice. Imagine you are a scholar, perhaps a student at the University of Salamanca, one of the great centers of learning in Europe. You spend your days poring over ancient texts, debating philosophy, and exploring the burgeoning fields of science and medicine. The air crackles with intellectual energy, with the excitement of discovery. But then, the shadow of the Inquisition falls. Suddenly, certain books disappear from the library shelves. Debates become hushed, then cease altogether. Your professors, once so eager to discuss new ideas, now speak only of orthodoxy and dogma. It's like being in a vibrant, bustling marketplace of ideas, only to have a giant, invisible censor come through and start confiscating all the interesting goods. The trials themselves were a mockery of justice. There was no presumption of innocence. You were considered guilty until proven innocent, and proving innocence was almost impossible. The inquisitors acted as both prosecutors and judges. Your only defense was to confess and beg for mercy, or to try and prove that your accusers were motivated by malice. A difficult feat when you didn't even know who they were. It's like playing a board game where the rules are constantly changing and the dealer always wins. The Inquisition's control over intellectual life was exercised primarily through censorship. They established an extensive system for reviewing books, pamphlets, and even private correspondence, looking for anything that might be deemed heretical, morally corrupting, or simply too challenging to established doctrine. This wasn't just about religious texts. It extended to philosophy, science, literature, and even popular ballads. If it could be read, it could be censored. It's a bit like having a very strict librarian who not only tells you what you can't read, but also burns the books they don't approve of. Torquemada's legacy is undeniably one of immense suffering and oppression. He transformed the Inquisition from a nascent idea into a formidable, terrifying reality. His policies shaped its procedures, expanded its reach, and intensified its brutality. He was a man of his time, certainly, but his actions had consequences that reverberated for generations, leaving an indelible mark on Spanish society and beyond. The infamous Index Librorum Prohibitorum, or Index of Prohibited Books, became a powerful tool of control. This was a list constantly updated of all the books that Catholics were forbidden to read, own, or publish. If a book was on the index, it was considered dangerous, and possession of it could lead to severe penalties, including imprisonment or worse. Imagine trying to stay informed, to learn about the wider world, when the very act of reading certain texts could brand you as a heretic. You'd find yourself looking over your shoulder even in the privacy of your own study, wondering if that innocent-looking volume on astronomy might actually be a one-way ticket to the torture chamber. The fear he instilled was so profound that it became ingrained in the collective consciousness. Even after his death in 1498, the system he built continued to operate with chilling efficiency. The shadow he cast lingered, a constant reminder of the dangers of religious extremism and unchecked power. You might find yourself, years later, still instinctively lowering your voice when discussing anything controversial, still looking over your shoulder, even though the Grand Inquisitor himself is long gone. It's the kind of trauma that doesn't just fade with time, it becomes a part of the landscape. A common historical fact about the Inquisition's censorship is its impact on the printing press. While the printing press revolutionized the spread of knowledge across Europe, in Spain, its potential was severely curtailed by inquisitorial control. Every book, every pamphlet, every printed sheet had to be approved by the Inquisition before publication. This meant that new ideas, especially those coming from the burgeoning scientific revolution or the Protestant Reformation, were either heavily edited, suppressed entirely, or simply never saw the light of day in Spain. It's like having a super fast internet connection, but the only websites you can access are government-approved sermons. Think about the psychological impact on the inquisitors themselves. While they believed they were doing God's work, imagine the daily grind of interrogating, torturing, and condemning people. Did they ever question their methods? Did they ever have sleepless nights? Or did they become so desensitized that the suffering of others simply became a part of their bureaucratic routine? It's a chilling thought. How easily human beings can become instruments of cruelty when convinced of their own righteousness. The censorship wasn't always about outright heresy. Sometimes, books were placed on the index for seemingly innocuous reasons, such as containing minor theological errors, or even for being written by authors who were suspected of heresy, regardless of the content of the book itself. This created an atmosphere of extreme caution among writers and scholars. Why risk years of work, and potentially your life, on a book that might never see print, or worse, might land you in prison? It fostered a culture of intellectual timidity, where conformity was rewarded and originality was punished. The Spanish Inquisition, under Torquemada, also became a powerful symbol of Spanish identity. For the Catholic monarchs, it was a tool to forge a unified nation, purged of religious dissent. For many old Christians, it represented the triumph of true faith. But for the conversos and moriscos, and indeed for anyone who fell under its suspicion, it was a symbol of terror, oppression, and the loss of fundamental freedoms. It's a stark reminder that history is often viewed very differently, depending on which side of the power dynamic you happen to be on. An obscure detail about the Inquisition's censorship was its practice of expurgation. This meant that instead of outright banning a book, the inquisitors would order that certain passages or phrases be removed or altered. So, a book might be purified of its problematic content, allowing it to be read, but only in a heavily modified form. This created a generation of scholars and readers who were exposed to incomplete or distorted versions of important texts, subtly shaping their understanding of the world. It's like trying to understand a complex story when someone has randomly cut out every third paragraph and replaced them with blank spaces. The Grand Inquisitor's grip was not just on the accused, but on the entire society. It dictated what you could say, what you could read, and even what you could think. It fostered a culture of conformity, where deviation from the norm was met with severe punishment. This had a profound effect on intellectual and artistic expression, as people became hesitant to challenge established ideas or to create anything that might be deemed unorthodox. It's like trying to paint a masterpiece when someone is constantly looking over your shoulder, ready to declare your brushstrokes heretical. This intellectual blackout had profound consequences for Spain's development. While other European nations were experiencing a renaissance of scientific discovery, philosophical inquiry, and artistic innovation, Spain became increasingly isolated intellectually. The free exchange of ideas, which is essential for intellectual progress, was severely limited. Spanish scholars were cut off from the latest developments in other parts of Europe, and foreign scholars were wary of publishing or even visiting Spain. It's like a country voluntarily putting itself under a giant intellectual dome, cutting itself off from the fresh air of new ideas. So, as the night deepens, and the memory of Torquemada's unyielding will settles over you, you begin to understand that the Inquisition wasn't just a series of isolated events. It was a meticulously constructed system, designed to control, to intimidate, and to purify, all under the iron hand of a man who believed he was wielding divine authority. And you, an ordinary person living in extraordinary times, are now fully immersed in its chilling reality, the universities. Once vibrant centers of debate became increasingly focused on scholastic theology and rote memorization of approved texts. Critical thinking and independent inquiry were discouraged, replaced by an emphasis on orthodoxy and obedience. Professors and students alike learned to self-censor, to avoid controversial topics, and to stick to the safe, established paths. Imagine attending a university where the goal isn't to think for yourself, but to perfectly parrot what you have been told. It's a recipe for intellectual stagnation. You have felt Torquemada's iron grip, his icy presence like a dark cloud over Spain. Now imagine living in a world where that cloud not only hovers overhead, but also seeps into every corner of everyday life, turning harmless whispers into deadly accusations. This is a place where suspicion becomes a currency, and trust is a luxury few can afford. The Inquisition's reach extended even to private libraries. Inquisitors had the right to search homes and confiscate any prohibited books they found. This meant that even if you managed to acquire a forbidden text, you lived in constant fear of discovery. Many people burned their own books or hid them in secret compartments, rather than risk the wrath of the Holy Office. It's a tragic scene, watching your precious collection of knowledge go up in smoke, all because of an unseen threat. You are sitting in a small tavern, candles flickering in earthenware cups. The laughter of those around you seems muffled, as if an invisible curtain is covering every sound. A neighbor, someone you have known all your life, is telling a story. He talks about a new family that moved into town, wealthy conversos, and how they never eat pork. He shrugs. They probably don't like pork, but in his eyes, you see a glint, an unhealthy curiosity. And you know that the story won't end there. That's how it starts. A whisper, a small suspicion, and then it grows like a snowball rolling downhill until it becomes an avalanche. The fear of censorship and persecution also led to a brain drain. Many of Spain's most brilliant minds, particularly those from converso backgrounds who were disproportionately targeted, chose to flee the country, seeking intellectual freedom and safety in other parts of Europe. These exiles often went on to make significant contributions to science, philosophy, and literature in their new homes, while Spain was left poorer for their absence. It's like a country losing its most talented athletes because they're not allowed to play by the rules they believe in. In the world of the Inquisition, accusations often start from the most unreliable sources. It could be a neighbor jealous of your prosperity, a dismissed servant seeking revenge, or even a child innocently repeating a phrase they heard from their parents. There are no limits to the age, gender, or social status of the accuser. This creates an environment where everyone is a potential threat. You have to be careful with every word, every gesture, because anything can be misinterpreted and used against you. It was like playing spies, but no one knew who the spy was. And if you were discovered, you would not only be eliminated from the game, but also from life. Historians still debate whether Spain's intellectual decline in the centuries that followed was primarily a direct result of the Inquisition, or whether it was the result of more complex factors, including constant wars, economic depression, and dependence on gold from the New World. Some argue that the Inquisition played a decisive role in stifling innovation and critical thinking, leaving Spain behind other European nations. However, others argue that while the Inquisition certainly had a negative impact, it was only one of many factors that contributed to the overall decline of the Spanish Empire. It was clearly not conducive to intellectual development. The Inquisition's impact on scientific progress was particularly stark. New theories in astronomy, physics, and medicine, which challenged established church doctrines, were met with suspicion and suppression. Figures like Galileo, though not directly persecuted by the Spanish Inquisition, served as a chilling example of what could happen to those who dared to question the geocentric model or other accepted scientific views. In Spain, this meant that scientific inquiry was often limited to areas that did not challenge theological dogma, or conducted in secret. It's like trying to build a rocket to the moon, but you're only allowed to use a slingshot. A common historical fact about the Inquisition is the absolute secrecy of the proceedings. When an accusation was made, the identity of the accuser was kept secret. You would never know who had denounced you, which made defending yourself almost impossible. You could not confront your accuser, question their motives, or point out inconsistencies in their testimony. This not only protected the accuser from retaliation, but also encouraged denunciation, since people knew they could act without fear of being exposed. You could be arrested in the middle of the night, dragged from your bed, and locked up in a secret prison, without ever knowing why. It was a living nightmare where you were the main character, but there was no script. Imagine you are in prison. You do not know what you are accused of, who accused you, or when you will be tried. As each day passes, anxiety eats away at you. You try to recall every conversation, every action, every thought you have ever had. You wonder if someone misunderstood a joke, or an innocent gesture. You begin to suspect everyone, even your closest loved ones, because you know that anyone could be your accuser. This isolation and uncertainty is a powerful form of psychological torture, designed to break your will and make you desperate to confess, regardless of whether you are guilty or not. Even art and literature were not immune. While the Spanish Golden Age produced masterpieces, artists and writers often had to navigate a complex landscape of self-censorship, ensuring their works conformed to religious and moral standards. Plays, poems, and paintings that contained even subtle critiques of society or religion could draw the attention of the Holy Office. This led to a certain conservatism in artistic expression, favoring themes that were religiously orthodox and politically safe. It's like being a painter, but you're only allowed to use shades of brown and gray. And every painting has to be of a saint. A little-known detail about the accusation system is that the Inquisition sometimes used professional accusers, or people who had been convicted and acquitted as spies. These individuals, often those who had been tortured or threatened, would be sent into communities to listen, gather information, and report any signs of heresy. They were the eyes and ears of the Inquisition, infiltrating social networks and destroying trust from within. You could be sharing a meal with an old friend, confiding your worries, not knowing that your every word was being recorded and would be used against you. It was like having a computer mouse installed in your head, recording your every thought and emotion. The fear of being denounced for intellectual curiosity extended to private conversations. People became wary of discussing controversial ideas, of sharing new philosophical concepts, or even of expressing doubts about religious dogma, even among trusted friends. The walls had ears, and the inquisitors were always listening. This created a chilling silence, where genuine intellectual exchange was replaced by cautious platitudes and superficial discussions. You'd find yourself talking about the weather or the price of olives, rather than risking a conversation about the nature of the universe. This system created a vicious cycle of suspicion and denunciation. When one person was accused of a crime, they were often encouraged, or forced, to denounce others in order to receive leniency. This meant that one accusation could lead to dozens of others, creating a domino effect that spread throughout the community. You can be drawn into a complex web of accusations and counter-accusations, where each person is trying to save themselves by putting others in danger. It is like a jigsaw puzzle where each piece is an accusation, and you cannot escape until all the pieces are in place. The Inquisition also targeted books written in Hebrew or Arabic, even if their content was not explicitly heretical. This was part of a broader effort to eradicate any lingering cultural or religious influences from Spain's Jewish and Muslim past. Ancient texts, invaluable sources of knowledge and history, were systematically destroyed, leading to an irreparable loss of cultural heritage. It's like burning down a library because you don't like the language some of the books are written in. The fear is not limited to those who might be accused of heresy. It extends to those who might be accused of concealing heresy, or of not reporting what they know. If you know someone who is practicing heresy and do not report them, you may be considered guilty as well. This creates enormous social pressure for people to be vigilant and to report. You have to ask yourself, should I report my neighbor, whom I suspect, to protect myself and my family? It is a terrible choice, a trade-off between conscience and survival. Even the most innocuous actions can be misinterpreted. A joke about a priest, a meatless Friday meal, or even bathing too frequently considered a Jewish habit can all be used as evidence against you. The Inquisition doesn't care about your intentions. It only cares about your actions and how they can interpret them to suit their purposes. It's like a game of spot the difference, but any discrepancy can lead to your conviction. The legacy of this intellectual blackout lingered for centuries. Spain, once a bridge between cultures and a vibrant center of learning, became known for its rigid orthodoxy and its relative isolation from the intellectual currents of the rest of Europe. The effects of censorship and the suppression of free thought were deeply ingrained in the national psyche, shaping educational systems and cultural attitudes long after the Inquisition itself had faded. It's a long, dark shadow that continued to fall over the land, even after the sun had risen elsewhere. The investigation process often begins with covert intelligence gathering. Inquisitors will send their agents into the community to listen for rumors, gather testimony from confidential witnesses, and look for any signs of heresy. They'll build a case against you before you even know you're under investigation. By the time you are caught, they have a wealth of information, often inaccurate or distorted, to use against you. This makes defending yourself almost impossible, since you are fighting an invisible enemy who knows everything about you, but you know nothing about them. The Inquisition's methods of control were incredibly effective because they targeted the very source of intellectual dissent. The books, the thinkers, and the institutions that fostered new ideas. By controlling what could be read, what could be taught, and what could be discussed, they effectively controlled the minds of the populace. It was a form of thought control, enforced with the threat of imprisonment, torture, and death. You learn to think within the lines, to color within the boundaries, or face the consequences. Historians still debate whether the number of false accusations, motivated by personal vendettas, jealousy, or the desire to seize property, actually outnumbered those based on sincere religious beliefs. Some argue that the secretive system of the Inquisition created a perfect environment for false accusations, where personal grudges could be settled under the guise of religious purification. They point to numerous cases where individuals were convicted and then exonerated, but only after their reputations and fortunes had been ruined. Others, however, argue that despite false accusations, The majority of cases were based on genuine suspicions of heresy, even if those suspicions were exaggerated by fanaticism. Regardless, it is clear that the system destroyed trust in the community and instilled fear. Even seemingly innocuous subjects could become dangerous. For instance, the study of astrology, while popular in many parts of Europe, was often viewed with suspicion by the Inquisition, as it could be seen as challenging divine providence. Any form of divination or magic, even folk remedies that could be interpreted as witchcraft or heresy, leading to persecution. This meant that traditional knowledge passed down through generations also became vulnerable to the Inquisition's scrutiny. The presence of the Inquisition changed the way people interacted with each other. Conversations became shallower, less open. People avoided sensitive topics, and even harmless jokes could be misinterpreted. You might find yourself censoring yourself, thinking before you speak, and avoiding anyone who seemed different. It was like a silent film, where people communicated through gestures and eye contact because words could be a deadly weapon. Furthermore, the Inquisition encouraged children to denounce their parents. This was one of its most brutal aspects, destroying the most basic family bond. Imagine a child, perhaps swayed by religious fervor or simply trying to please the authorities, reporting their own parents for a seemingly innocuous act. The psychological damage this inflicted on families, tearing apart the very bonds of trust and love, is almost unimaginable. It's like asking a child to choose between their parents and their own safety, a choice no one should ever have to make. The impact wasn't just on grand theories or academic debates. It affected ordinary people's access to information and their ability to engage with new ideas. The common person, already largely illiterate, was further isolated from intellectual currents by the strict censorship. Their worldview became narrower, shaped primarily by the doctrines of the Church and the pronouncements of the Inquisition. It's like living in a world where the only news you get is from a single, highly biased source. When an accusation is made, the Inquisitors will begin a thorough investigation. They will question witnesses, collect evidence, and build a case against the accused. The entire process is kept secret, and the accused often knows nothing about it until they are arrested. This creates a sense of helplessness and despair, since there is nothing you can do to stop it. You can only wait and hope that you are not next. The intellectual blackout also contributed to a climate of suspicion and distrust within academic and artistic communities. Scholars became wary of collaborating, of sharing their research, or of expressing dissenting opinions, even in private. This stifled creativity and innovation, as people became more concerned with self-preservation than with intellectual advancement. It's a sad irony that an institution claiming to protect the truth ultimately became its greatest enemy. The denunciation system also creates an underground economy of information. Those who can provide information about suspected heretics can receive rewards or leniency. This encourages unscrupulous people to exploit the system for personal gain, turning suspicion into a valuable commodity. It is like a stock market of fear, where your value increases as you denounce others. And as the night deepens, and you reflect on the chilling silence that fell over the intellectual landscape of Spain, you realize that the Inquisition's misery wasn't just about physical pain or public shame. It was about the systematic suppression of the human spirit, the extinguishing of curiosity, and the deliberate creation of an intellectual darkness. You are living in a world where the greatest danger isn't what you do, but what you think. And the price of an independent mind is often too high to bear. Surprisingly, the Inquisitors also have defenders for the accused, but their role is very limited. These defenders are usually priests appointed by the Inquisitors, and their job is not to defend the innocence of the accused, but to encourage them to confess and receive leniency. They are not allowed to meet with the accused in private, and they are not allowed to question the Inquisitors or their evidence. It is a sham of justice, designed to create the appearance of a fair trial when in reality it is not. The existence of whispers and accusations turned everyday life into a minefield. You had to be constantly on guard, always wondering if someone was listening. If someone was recording what you said, you had to learn to hide your true thoughts, to present a perfect facade of piety and obedience. It was like a long play where everyone was an actor, and any mistake could lead to a tragic outcome. You've witnessed the suffocating grip of the Inquisition within Spain, the fear it instilled, the lives it shattered, and the intellectual darkness it cast. But the story of the Spanish Inquisition doesn't end at the Iberian Peninsula. As Spain forged a vast global empire, its most infamous institution, the Holy Office, extended its long, chilling arm across oceans, bringing its unique brand of misery to distant lands, leaving an indelible mark on the New World and beyond. Even death was no salvation. If a person was convicted of heresy after death, their remains could be exhumed and burned, and their property could be confiscated. This meant that even after your death, you were not safe from the grip of the Inquisition. I mean, it was like a reverse life insurance policy, where your death could bring disaster to your family. Imagine you are a hopeful colonist, setting sail from Seville, leaving behind the familiar anxieties of home for the promise of a new life in the Americas. You dream of gold, of fertile lands, of a fresh start. The vast, open ocean stretches before you, a symbol of freedom and boundless opportunity. But as your ship cuts through the waves, you carry with you not just your earthly possessions, but also the invisible baggage of the Inquisition's authority. You soon discover that even across thousands of miles of water, the shadow of the Holy Office is never far behind. It's like moving to a new country to escape your nosy neighbors, only to find out they bought the house next door before you even arrived. The prevalence of accusations has created a social climate of tension and anxiety. Families are divided, communities are suspected, and trust is eroded. You can't trust anyone, and anyone can be your enemy. It's a kind of psychological warfare where the enemy isn't an outside army, but the fear within each person. The Spanish crown, deeply intertwined with the church, saw the evangelization of the newly conquered territories as a primary mission. But with evangelization came the concern for orthodoxy. How could they ensure that the new Christians of the Americas, the indigenous populations who were being converted, and the conversos and moriscos who had emigrated were truly devout? The answer, naturally, was the Inquisition. And as you lie down, trying to fall asleep, you can't help but hear the whispers. Whispers of doubt, of fear, of accusation. They hang in the air, a constant reminder of the Inquisition's presence, and of how your life, and the lives of those around you, are caught in its terrifying web. You can only hope that, when you wake up in the morning, you won't be the next one dragged into the darkness. You've felt the icy tendrils of suspicion, watched as whispers turned into accusations, and understood the terrifying power wielded by the Grand Inquisitor. Now, imagine the moment that fear becomes a chilling reality. The heavy knock on your door, the abrupt entry of cloaked figures, and the stark, unyielding command. You are under arrest by the Holy Office of the Inquisition. Your world, once vibrant and familiar, shrinks in an instant to the confines of a secret prison, a place designed not just to hold you, but to break you. The first formal tribunals of the Inquisition in the New World were established in Mexico City and Lima, Peru in 1570, and later in Cartagena de Indias, Colombia in 1610. Before these permanent tribunals, local bishops and special inquisitorial delegates had already been conducting investigations and trials. So, even in the early days of colonization, the seeds of inquisitorial control were being sown. You might arrive in a bustling colonial city, expecting a wild frontier, only to find a familiar, chilling bureaucracy already firmly in place. You're led through the winding, shadowed streets, the sounds of the city fading behind you, replaced by the rhythmic crunch of your escort's boots. The air grows colder, the silence heavier. You're taken to a building that looks unremarkable from the outside, perhaps an old mansion or a converted monastery. But once inside, the true nature of the place reveals itself. Heavy, iron-bound doors clang shut behind you, echoing in the stone corridors. The light, once abundant, recedes to a mere sliver, casting long, dancing shadows that seem to mock your dwindling hope. A common historical fact about the Inquisition in the Americas is its primary focus on conversos and Protestants, rather than the indigenous populations. While indigenous people were subjected to the spiritual authority of the local bishops and missionaries, they were generally exempt from the direct jurisdiction of the formal Inquisition tribunals, as they were considered new in the faith and therefore less culpable for perceived heresies. This didn't mean they were free from religious coercion, but their punishments usually fell under the purview of the regular ecclesiastical courts, which could still be severe. It's a subtle distinction, but an important one. Like getting a parking ticket versus having your car impounded, These weren't your typical secular jails, bustling with common criminals and the occasional boisterous drunk. The Inquisition's prisons were different. They were places of psychological torment as much as physical confinement, designed to disorient, isolate, and ultimately to force confession. You are led down, perhaps into the damp earth, or deep within the heart of the building, where the walls are thick and the air is stale. The silence is profound, broken only by the distant drip of water or the faint, unsettling creak of timbers. It's like being sealed inside a tomb, but you're still alive, and acutely aware of every passing second. For the conversos who had fled Spain hoping to escape persecution, the arrival of the Inquisition in the New World was a crushing blow. Many had established successful lives, built new communities, and thought they were finally safe. But the long arm of the Holy Office reached across the Atlantic, hunting them down based on old records and new denunciations. Imagine the despair of realizing that the freedom you sought was an illusion, that the past you tried to escape had followed you across the world. Your cell is small, perhaps just large enough for a cot, if you're lucky, or merely a straw mat on the stone floor. There are no windows, no view of the outside world, no way to gauge the passage of time except by the meager meals that are occasionally brought to you. The darkness is almost absolute, forcing your eyes to strain, your mind to conjure images from the blackness. You might try to count the stones in the wall or trace patterns in the damp. Cold air. Anything to keep your thoughts from spiraling into despair. It's like being trapped in the world's most unfun escape room, except there's no way out, and the clock is ticking on your sanity. The methods of the Inquisition in the Americas were largely a mirror image of those in Spain: secret denunciations, anonymous accusers, prolonged imprisonment, psychological manipulation, and the use of torture to extract confessions. The auto da fe, too, was transplanted to the New World, becoming a public spectacle in cities like Mexico City and Lima, designed to terrify and control the colonial populace. You might find yourself witnessing a chilling echo of the ceremonies you thought you'd left behind. The same San Benitos, the same solemn processions, but under a scorching tropical sun. A common historical fact about the Inquisition's prisons is the deliberate use of solitary confinement. This wasn't just about security, it was a key psychological tool. Deprived of human contact, of conversation, of any external stimulus, prisoners often became disoriented, anxious, and desperate for any interaction. Imagine days turning into weeks, weeks into months, with no one to talk to, no one to confirm your reality. Your own thoughts become your only companions, and sometimes they're not very good company. This isolation was designed to break down your resistance, to make you vulnerable to the Inquisitor's suggestions that confession was your only path to relief. An obscure detail about the Inquisition's reach beyond Spain is its influence in places like the Canary Islands and even the Philippines. The Canary Islands, strategically located off the coast of Africa, served as an important stopover for ships sailing to the Americas, and thus became an early outpost for inquisitorial activity. In the Philippines, the Inquisition was less formally established but still wielded considerable influence through the local bishops and religious orders, who acted as commissaries of the Holy Office. This meant that even in these far-flung corners of the Spanish Empire, the threat of inquisitorial scrutiny was a constant presence, shaping local customs and beliefs. It's like finding out your favorite obscure band is actually a front for a global surveillance network. The food, when it came, was meager and unappetizing. A piece of stale bread, a watery broth, perhaps some dried fish. Just enough to sustain life, but not enough to provide comfort or strength. You learn to savor every crumb, every drop, because it's the only connection you have to the outside world. A fleeting reminder that time is still passing, even if you can't perceive it. You might even start to hallucinate the smell of a roasting chicken, or the taste of fresh fruit, a cruel trick of your deprived senses. The vast distances and slow communication across the empire meant that the Inquisition in the Americas often operated with a degree of autonomy, but always under the ultimate authority of the Suprema, the Supreme Council of the Inquisition in Spain. This created a complex bureaucratic web, with reports and dossiers traveling back and forth across the Atlantic, ensuring that even the most remote cases were eventually reviewed by the central authority. It's a testament to the meticulous, almost obsessive nature of the Inquisition's administration. An obscure detail about the Inquisition's prisons is the calabozo de curación, or healing cell. This was a special type of cell, often even more restrictive and isolating, used for prisoners who were deemed to be feigning madness or resistance. The idea was that extreme isolation and deprivation would cure them of their stubbornness and bring them to confession. It's a chilling twist on the concept of rehabilitation, where the cure is arguably worse than the illness. You might hear whispers of these cells, places where even the most defiant spirits eventually broke, becoming pliable in the hands of their captors. The Inquisition in the Americas also played a significant role in suppressing the spread of Protestant ideas. As other European powers, particularly England and the Netherlands, began to establish their own colonies and trading networks, Protestant sailors and merchants occasionally found their way into Spanish colonial ports. These individuals were seen as a grave threat to the spiritual purity of the empire, and the Inquisition actively hunted them down, often leading to arrests, trials, and severe punishments. You might see a foreign sailor full of swagger and strange ideas suddenly disappear from the taverns, a chilling reminder that even casual contact with the outside world could be dangerous. The silence was often punctuated by other sounds, faint and unsettling. The distant clang of a door, the shuffle of footsteps in the corridor, or, most terrifyingly, the muffled cries of another prisoner. You try to decipher these sounds, to understand what's happening, but the thick walls and the oppressive silence make it impossible. Each sound becomes a source of anxiety, a reminder that you are not alone in your suffering, but also that you are utterly helpless to intervene or even understand the fate of others. It's like living next door to a very active haunted house, but you can't move out, and you're pretty sure you're next on the ghost list. The economic impact of the Inquisition was also felt in the colonies. Confiscated property from convicted heretics, particularly wealthy conversos, contributed to the coffers of the colonial tribunals and the Spanish crown. This provided another incentive for the Inquisition to pursue cases, turning the pursuit of religious purity into a profitable enterprise, even across continents. It's a grim reminder that even piety can have a price tag, and that price is often paid in human suffering. Hygiene was minimal, if it existed at all. The cells were often damp, cold, and infested with vermin. Diseases were rampant, and many prisoners succumbed to illness before they ever faced a tribunal. You'd find yourself constantly itching, constantly uncomfortable, adding another layer of misery to your existence. The indignity of it all, the stripping away of your basic humanity, was part of the process. It was designed to humble you, to make you feel utterly worthless, and thus more susceptible to the Inquisition's authority. The fear of the Inquisition created a climate of suspicion and self-censorship in the colonies, mirroring the situation in Spain. Colonists became wary of expressing dissenting opinions, of associating with anyone deemed suspect, or of engaging in any behavior that might be misinterpreted. The vibrant cultural exchange that could have flourished in the diverse colonial societies was often stifled by the pervasive fear of denunciation. It's like trying to build a new society, but everyone is constantly looking over their shoulder, afraid of making a wrong move. The psychological pressure was relentless. You knew that outside, your family was suffering, your reputation was being dragged through the mud, and your property was likely being seized. This knowledge, combined with the isolation and uncertainty, was a powerful weapon in the Inquisitors' arsenal. They didn't need to lay a hand on you to inflict immense pain. The torment was internal, a constant gnawing at your soul. You'd spend hours replaying every conversation, every interaction, searching for the one thing you might have said or done that led you to this dark place. Historians still debate whether the Inquisition in the New World was truly effective in suppressing heresy and maintaining religious orthodoxy, or whether it was simply a tool for social and political control. Some argue that its presence was successful in significantly halting the spread of Protestantism and ensuring the loyalty of converts. However, others argue that while it caused fear and suffering, it did not completely suppress secret activities or dissenting ideas, and that its role was often more symbolic than practical in religious purification. It clearly created an oppressive environment. The Inquisition also extended its censorship efforts to the colonies. Books and ideas deemed dangerous in Spain were equally prohibited in the Americas. This meant that intellectual developments in Europe, particularly those related to the Enlightenment and new scientific discoveries, were slow to reach the Spanish colonies, contributing to a certain intellectual isolation. Colonial universities and scholars operated under the same strictures as their counterparts in Spain, limiting the scope of inquiry and fostering a conservative intellectual environment. It's like trying to run a global company, but your overseas branches are stuck using dial-up internet. Sometimes, you might be allowed a brief visit from a counselor or a defender, usually a priest appointed by the Inquisition, but these visits were not for your benefit. The counselor's role was not to defend your innocence, but to persuade you to confess. They would tell you that the Inquisition was merciful, that confession was the path to salvation, and that stubbornness would only lead to greater suffering. It was a cruel charade, designed to give the appearance of due process while denying you any real defense. It's like a lawyer who's secretly working for the other side, and their only advice is to plead guilty. The impact on indigenous cultures was complex. While not directly targeted by the formal Inquisition tribunals, indigenous spiritual practices were often viewed with suspicion by missionaries and local authorities. Any deviation from Catholic orthodoxy, any lingering adherence to traditional beliefs, could be interpreted as idolatry or witchcraft, leading to severe punishments by the local ecclesiastical courts. This meant that the Inquisition, indirectly, contributed to the suppression of indigenous spiritual traditions and the imposition of European religious norms. You might see an elder revered in their community, suddenly subjected to public penance for practicing ancient rituals, a stark reminder of the clash of worlds. The length of imprisonment varied wildly. Some prisoners were held for weeks, others for months, and some for years, even decades. There was no fixed timeline, no guarantee of when your case would be heard. This indefinite detention was another form of psychological torture, leaving you in a perpetual state of limbo, always waiting for the next interrogation, the next meal, the next sign of life, or death. You might lose track of the seasons, of the years, your sense of time becoming as distorted as your sense of self. The reach of the Inquisition even extended to the high seas. Inquisitors had the authority to board ships and investigate suspected heretics among the crew or passengers. This meant that even the journey itself, the supposed escape from the old world, could be fraught with danger. You could be sailing towards a new life, only to find yourself arrested in the middle of the ocean. Your dreams of freedom dissolving into the vast, indifferent waves. The Inquisitors would often use the information they had secretly gathered against you, presenting it in a way that made it seem overwhelming and irrefutable. They would twist your words, misinterpret your actions, and use anonymous testimonies to build a case. You would be confronted with these accusations, often without knowing their source, and expected to refute them. It was a game of shadows where the rules were rigged, and you were always at a disadvantage. The cases handled by the colonial inquisitions were diverse, reflecting the unique social and cultural landscape of the Americas. Beyond conversos and Protestants, they also investigated cases of bigamy, blasphemy, witchcraft, and various moral offenses, often intertwining with the daily lives and social anxieties of the colonial populace. This meant that almost anyone, regardless of their background, could potentially fall under the Inquisition's scrutiny. The fear of torture was ever present, even if it wasn't immediately applied. The Inquisitors would often show you the instruments of torture, or describe their use in chilling detail, as a way to encourage confession. The mere threat was often enough to break a prisoner's will. You'd lie awake in the dark, imagining the pain, the screams, the complete loss of control. It's a fear that gnaws at your insides, making you question how much you can endure before you break. The legacy of the Inquisition in the Americas is still debated today. While it may not have been as consistently active or as widely feared as in Spain, its symbolic presence and its occasional brutal interventions had a lasting impact on colonial society. It reinforced the authority of the crown and the church, contributed to a culture of conformity, and left a lingering sense of caution and suspicion. You might visit an old colonial city today and still feel a faint echo of that historical fear, a sense of secrets hidden beneath the surface. Historians still debate whether conditions in Inquisition prisons were actually worse than their secular counterparts, or whether their secrecy and psychological purpose made them more terrifying. Some argue that secular prisons were often more crowded, dirty, and violent, and that inquisitors were, at least in theory, instructed to maintain more humane conditions to preserve the prisoners' souls. Others, however, argue that the isolation, uncertainty, And systematic psychological torture in Inquisition prisons made them a unique and cruel form of punishment, regardless of comparable physical conditions. They were clearly designed to break your will rather than simply confine you. The psychological manipulation extended to the very language used. You were not a prisoner, but a penitent, and your time in prison was framed as an opportunity for spiritual reflection and repentance. This linguistic sleight of hand was designed to make you internalize the Inquisition's narrative, to believe that your suffering was for your own good, a path to spiritual cleansing. It's like being told that eating your vegetables is a spiritual journey, when all you really want is a cookie. The auto-da-fés in the New World, though fewer in number than in Spain, were equally dramatic and terrifying. They served as powerful public rituals, designed to reinforce the spiritual and political order in the burgeoning colonies. The sight of condemned individuals, paraded through the streets and then executed, was meant to send an unmistakable message to the diverse populations of the Americas. Conformity was expected, and deviance would not be tolerated. Sometimes prisoners would be placed in cells with informers, who would pretend to be fellow accused individuals. These informers would try to gain your trust, to elicit confessions or incriminating statements, which would then be reported back to the inquisitors. You'd find yourself desperately craving human connection, only to realize that the person offering it was a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's a betrayal that cuts deeper than any physical wound, because it attacks your very capacity for trust. The Inquisition also played a role in shaping the identity of the Spanish colonies. By enforcing a strict Catholic orthodoxy, it contributed to the creation of a distinct Hispanic American culture, deeply rooted in Catholicism. This cultural uniformity, however, came at the cost of suppressing diverse indigenous and European traditions, leading to a less pluralistic society than might have otherwise developed. The secret nature of the prisons also meant that families had no idea where their loved ones were, or even if they were still alive. They would desperately search, inquire, and pray, but the Inquisition maintained a veil of absolute secrecy. This lack of information added another layer of torment for those outside the prison walls, leaving them in a perpetual state of agonizing uncertainty. Imagine your child disappearing, and no one will tell you where they are, or why. The logistical challenges of operating an institution like the Inquisition across such vast distances were immense. Communication was slow, travel was perilous, and maintaining consistent control over far-flung tribunals required constant effort. Yet, the fact that they managed to do so, to extend their reach across an entire ocean, speaks volumes about the determination of the Spanish crown and the Holy Office to maintain absolute religious conformity throughout their empire. It's like trying to manage a global chain of fast food restaurants, but all your orders have to travel by slow boat, and your ingredients are always under suspicion. The experience of being in an Inquisition prison was designed to strip you of your identity, your dignity, and your will. You were reduced to a number, a case file, a soul to be saved through whatever means necessary. The goal was to make you so desperate, so broken, that you would confess to anything, just to escape the torment of the unknown, the silence, and the gnawing fear. The stories of those who fled Spain only to be caught by the Inquisition in the Americas are particularly poignant. They represent the ultimate failure of escape, the realization that the shadow of the Holy Office was inescapable, a global net from which there was no true refuge. Their lives, shattered twice over, serve as a powerful testament to the pervasive misery inflicted by this institution. And as you lie on your cold, damp floor listening to the drip of water and the distant, unsettling sounds, you realize that the walls around you are not just stone. They are built of fear, of secrecy, and of the absolute power of an institution that has decided your fate long before you even stepped foot inside. This is where the whispers turn into screams, and where hope, if it exists at all, is a flickering, almost imperceptible flame in the profound darkness. You are truly alone, and the only way out is through the crucible of confession. And as the night deepens and you consider the vastness of the Spanish Empire, you realize that the misery of the Inquisition was not confined to a single land. It spread like a slow-burning fire, carried by ships and decrees across oceans and continents, leaving its mark of fear, suspicion, and intellectual suppression wherever the Spanish flag was planted. Even in the promise of a new world, The old world's shadows found a way to linger, making life miserable, even in paradise. You've endured the crushing isolation of the secret prison, the gnawing uncertainty, and the slow erosion of your sanity. Now, the heavy door of your cell creaks open, and you are led, perhaps blindfolded, through echoing corridors. The air grows slightly warmer, hinting at human presence, but the dread in your stomach tightens. You are about to enter the interrogation chamber, the heart of the Inquisition's chilling process, where the art of questioning is refined to a brutal science, designed not to seek truth, but to extract confession at any cost. You've journeyed through the chilling landscape of the Spanish Inquisition, from its terrifying inception to its far-reaching global influence. You've felt the fear, witnessed the spectacles, and understood the profound misery it inflicted. Now, as the centuries turn and the world begins to shift, you start to perceive a subtle change in the air. The iron grip of the Inquisition, once so absolute, slowly begins to loosen, but its echoes, its lasting legacy, continue to reverberate through Spanish society for centuries, shaping lives and minds long after its formal power has waned. You are seated perhaps on a hard wooden stool, facing a long table. Before you sit the Inquisitors, usually 2 or 3, their faces impassive, their eyes unblinking. They are often accompanied by a notary, meticulously recording every word, every sigh, every tremor. The room itself is stark, devoid of comfort, designed to emphasize their authority and your vulnerability. There might be a crucifix on the wall, a stark reminder of the divine judgment they claim to represent, or perhaps a collection of menacing-looking instruments, subtly placed to heighten your anxiety. It's like being in a job interview where the interviewers already know you're guilty, and the job is confessed heretic. Imagine it's the late 17th or early 18th century. The fervor of the initial religious wars has subsided, and the Enlightenment is beginning to cast its rational light across Europe. Spain, however, remains largely insulated, its intellectual life still constrained by the lingering shadow of the Holy Office. You might notice that the auto-da-fés become less frequent, the public burnings rarer, and the overall intensity of persecution seems to diminish. It's like a storm that has raged for centuries is finally beginning to calm, but the clouds still hang heavy, and the ground is still soaked with fear. The interrogation begins, not with shouts or threats, but often with a deceptively calm demeanor. The Inquisitors will address you as my son or my daughter, speaking in a soft, persuasive tone, urging you to unburden your soul. They tell you that they are there to help you, to lead you back to the path of righteousness, and that confession is the only way to achieve salvation. This initial gentleness is a psychological trap, designed to lull you into a false sense of security, to make you believe that cooperating will ease your suffering. You might even feel a flicker of hope, a desperate wish that these men truly are there to help you. The decline of the Inquisition was a gradual process, influenced by a complex interplay of factors. The rise of Bourbon monarchs in Spain, particularly after the War of the Spanish Succession in the early 18th century, brought with it a more centralized, absolutist state that increasingly viewed the Inquisition as an impediment to royal power, rather than a useful tool. The Bourbons, influenced by Enlightenment ideas of state control and rational administration, sought to curb the Inquisition's independent authority. Seeing it as a rival power center, you might hear whispers in the court, not of heresy, but of politics, of the king's desire to be the sole authority, even over matters of faith. But beneath the veneer of compassion lies an unyielding resolve. They will present you with the evidence against you, often vague and generalized. You are accused of heresy, of Judaizing, or of speaking against the Holy Office. You demand to know your accusers, to hear the specific charges, but your requests are met with a polite, firm refusal. The identity of your accusers is kept secret to protect them. They explain, and the charges are broad because your sins are many. It's a classic catch-22. You can't defend yourself against charges you don't know, brought by people you can't face. The intellectual currents of the Enlightenment, though slow to penetrate Spain, eventually began to erode the theological justifications for the Inquisition's methods. Philosophers and intellectuals across Europe openly criticized its brutality and its suppression of free thought. While these criticisms were often censored within Spain, they circulated in clandestine ways, influencing a growing number of educated Spaniards. It's like a slow, persistent drip of water, gradually wearing away at a seemingly impenetrable stone. The questions become repetitive, designed to wear down your resistance. They will ask you about your family, your friends, your daily habits, your thoughts, your dreams. They might ask the same question in different ways, hours apart, looking for inconsistencies. They might present you with fabricated evidence, claiming that a close friend has already confessed and implicated you. This psychological pressure is immense, designed to make you doubt your own memory, your own sanity, and the loyalty of everyone you know. It's like being stuck in a broken record, where the same terrifying song plays on repeat, slowly driving you mad. A common historical fact about the Inquisition's decline is its formal abolition in 1834. This didn't happen in a single dramatic moment, but was the culmination of a series of temporary abolitions and reinstatements, particularly during the tumultuous period of the Napoleonic Wars and the subsequent liberal and conservative political struggles in Spain. The final abolition came during the reign of Isabella II, marking the official end of an institution that had terrorized Spain for over 350 years. Imagine the collective sigh of relief, a breath held for generations, finally exhaled. An obscure detail about the interrogation process is the use of monitors, or familiars of the Inquisition, who would sometimes be placed in cells adjacent to the accused. These individuals would listen to the prisoners' cries, their mutterings, or even their conversations with themselves, reporting any perceived confessions or signs of guilt back to the inquisitors. Sometimes they would even pretend to be fellow prisoners, gaining trust and eliciting information. So, even in the supposed privacy of your cell, you were never truly alone, and every desperate whisper could become another nail in your coffin. It's like having a tiny, invisible microphone hidden in your teeth, broadcasting your every thought to a very judgmental audience. Even after its formal abolition, the legacy of the Inquisition continued to shape Spanish society. The concept of limpieza de sangre, for example, persisted in social attitudes and practices long after its legal basis was removed. Discrimination against those with Converso or Morisco ancestry continued in subtle ways, affecting social standing, marriage prospects, and access to certain professions. You might find that even in the mid-19th century, people still discreetly inquire about your family's lineage, a quiet echo of a past obsession. If the initial gentle approach fails, the tone shifts. The inquisitors become more stern, their questions sharper. They remind you of the gravity of your situation, of the eternal damnation that awaits unrepentant heretics. They might show you the instruments of torture, not yet using them, but letting their presence speak volumes. The garrucha, a pulley system used to hoist you into the air, or the toca, the water torture, are silent threats, their very existence a promise of unimaginable pain. Your stomach clenches, your heart pounds, and you can feel the cold sweat trickling down your back. An obscure detail about the Inquisition's lingering echoes is the continued existence of its vast archives. When the Inquisition was finally abolished, its immense collection of documents, the detailed records of trials, interrogations, confessions, and sentences were largely preserved. These archives, now invaluable historical resources, offer a chilling window into the lives of ordinary people caught in the Inquisition's web. They are a testament to its meticulous bureaucracy and a permanent record of the misery it inflicted. It's like a very, very large and depressing library, filled with the ghosts of forgotten lives. The purpose of torture, when applied, was not to punish, but to extract confession. The Inquisition's legal theory held that a confession was necessary for a conviction, and torture was seen as a legitimate means to obtain it. The inquisitors would carefully document the application of torture, ensuring that it was done without effusions of blood, and that the prisoner was not permanently maimed. Of course, and this was a legal nicety, the pain was real, and the psychological scars were permanent. You might find yourself praying for unconsciousness, for an end to the agony, for anything to make the pain stop. The psychological impact of centuries of fear and self-censorship also lingered. Generations had grown up in a society where independent thought was dangerous, where trust was a luxury, and where conformity was the safest path. This ingrained caution, this reluctance to challenge authority or express dissenting opinions, continued to influence Spanish culture and politics for decades. even centuries, after the Inquisition's demise. You might notice a certain reticence in public discourse, a tendency to avoid controversial topics, a quiet deference to authority, even when that authority is no longer backed by the threat of the stake. The most common forms of torture included the garrucha strappado, where your hands were tied behind your back and you were suspended from the ceiling by a rope, sometimes with weights attached to your feet, dislocating your shoulders. Another was the toca water torture, where you were forced to ingest large quantities of water, often through a cloth placed over your mouth and nose, simulating drowning. And then there was the potro rack, which stretched your limbs, slowly dislocating joints. These were not quick, brutal acts. They were prolonged. Agonizing processes, carefully controlled to maximize pain without causing immediate death. The economic consequences, too, were long-lasting. Families whose property had been confiscated rarely saw it returned. The wealth transfer that occurred during the Inquisition had permanent effects on the social and economic landscape, contributing to the impoverishment of certain groups and the entrenchment of others. The economic disparities created by the Inquisition continued to shape Spanish society, a silent, enduring scar on the nation's prosperity. Imagine the garrucha. You are hoisted up, your body screaming as your shoulders pop out of their sockets. The pain is blinding, all-consuming. The inquisitors stand below, their voices calm, asking you to confess, assuring you that the pain will stop if you just admit your sins. You might try to resist, to grit your teeth, but the agony is relentless, tearing at your flesh and your spirit. Your mind screams for relief, and the only way to get it is to utter the words they want to hear. It's like trying to hold your breath underwater for an eternity, while someone keeps asking you if you're ready to admit you can't swim. The intellectual isolation that the Inquisition fostered also had a lasting impact. Spain, which had once been at the forefront of European intellectual life, particularly during the golden age of Islamic and Jewish scholarship, found itself lagging behind other European nations in scientific and philosophical advancements. While the Enlightenment eventually made its way to Spain, its progress was slower, its impact less profound, due in part to the centuries of censorship and suppression of free thought. It's like a country that missed out on a crucial technological revolution because its leaders were too busy burning books. Even if you confessed under torture, your confession wasn't immediately accepted as valid. You would be taken back to your cell, and after a period of recovery, you would be asked to ratify your confession, meaning to confirm it without the application of torture. If you recanted, claiming your confession was forced, you might be subjected to torture again, or face even harsher penalties for being obstinate or lying to the Holy Office. It was a vicious cycle, designed to ensure that once you entered the system, escape was almost impossible. The memory of the Inquisition became a powerful symbol in later Spanish political and cultural debates. For liberals and anti-clericals, it represented the dark forces of fanaticism, oppression, and backwardness that they sought to overcome. For conservatives and traditionalists, it was sometimes defended as a necessary institution that had preserved Spain's religious purity and national unity. This ongoing debate about the Inquisition's legacy reflects its deep imprint on the Spanish national identity, a wound that continued to be picked at for generations. The Inquisitors were masters of psychological manipulation. They would use your fear, your isolation, and your desperation against you. They would exploit your religious beliefs, telling you that God already knew your sins and that only through confession could you hope for divine mercy. They would play on your love for your family, hinting at what might happen to them if you remained defiant. It was a carefully orchestrated performance, with you as the unwilling star and your soul as the prize. Historians still debate whether torture was truly effective in eliciting reliable information, or whether it primarily produced false confessions from people desperate to end their suffering. Some argue that in some cases, torture may have led to the discovery of real heretical networks, or the confirmation of secret operations. However, most historians today agree that torture is an extremely unreliable tool for uncovering the truth, as victims will often say anything to stop the pain. It is clear that its primary goal is to break the will and force a confession, regardless of the truth. The interrogations could last for hours, days, even weeks, broken only by periods of rest in your cell, where the fear of the next session would gnaw at you. You would emerge from these sessions physically and mentally exhausted, your spirit battered, your will almost entirely eroded. The Inquisitors, on the other hand, would remain fresh, taking turns, their resolve unwavering. It was a war of attrition, and you were always fighting a losing battle. The very concept of Spanish black legend, La Leyenda Negra, a historical narrative that emphasized the cruelty and fanaticism of the Spanish Empire, was heavily fueled by the actions of the Inquisition. While often exaggerated by Spain's rivals, the atrocities committed by the Holy Office undeniably contributed to this negative international perception, shaping how the world viewed Spain for centuries. You might travel abroad and find that the mere mention of Spain still conjures images of dark robes and burning pyres, a testament to the enduring power of this historical narrative. The notary, sitting quietly in the corner, played a crucial role. Every question, every answer, every sigh, every groan, every drop of water administered during torture, it was all meticulously recorded. These detailed transcripts, often hundreds of pages long, provide a chilling window into the interrogation process. They show the relentless questioning, the prisoner's desperate attempts to deny, and the eventual inevitable breaking point. It's like reading a very depressing script, where the ending is always the same, and you're the one who has to perform the tragic climax. The lingering echoes of the Inquisition can also be seen in the architecture and urban planning of many Spanish cities. The imposing buildings that once housed the tribunals, the squares where the auto de fe took place, and the narrow, winding streets that witnessed countless arrests all stand as silent monuments to a terrifying past. You might walk through an ancient plaza, feeling a strange chill, and realize that beneath your feet lies centuries of fear and suffering, embedded in the very stones. The concept of diminution of torture was also used. If a prisoner confessed during torture, the torture would be diminished or stopped. This was another psychological trick, reinforcing the idea that confession brought relief. It created a perverse incentive system where the only way to escape the agony was to admit guilt. Even if you were innocent, you might find yourself weighing the unbearable pain against the false confession. And in that moment, the false confession often seemed like the lesser evil. The church's role in Spanish society, though still significant, also underwent a subtle transformation. The absolute power it once wielded through the Inquisition was curtailed, and its relationship with the state became more defined by political negotiation rather than unquestioned spiritual authority. The memory of the Inquisition served as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ecclesiastical power. Even for the church itself, the Inquisitors were highly skilled in their craft. They studied human psychology. They understood how to exploit fear and desperation, and they were utterly convinced of the righteousness of their cause. They saw themselves not as torturers, but as spiritual doctors, performing painful but necessary surgery to save a soul from eternal damnation. This self-justification allowed them to carry out their brutal work with a chilling detachment. The personal stories of those affected by the Inquisition also continued to resonate through families and communities. The trauma of imprisonment, torture, and public shame was passed down through generations, shaping family narratives, fostering a sense of caution, and sometimes a quiet defiance. You might hear an old family story, whispered in hushed tones, about a distant ancestor who had trouble with the Holy Office, a veiled reference to a harrowing past that still casts a long shadow. Even if you managed to withstand the torture and refuse to confess, your ordeal was far from over. You might be declared vehemently suspect of heresy, meaning there was strong suspicion against you, even without a confession. This could still lead to severe penalties, including public penance, confiscation of property, or even perpetual imprisonment. The Inquisition rarely admitted defeat. If they couldn't get a confession, they would find another way to punish you and send a message to others. The Inquisition's legacy even influenced Spanish literature and art. Writers and artists, even after its abolition, often explored themes of religious fanaticism, persecution, and the human cost of intolerance, reflecting the deep impact of the institution on the national psyche. The shadows it cast continued to inspire dark tales and somber reflections, a testament to its enduring power as a cultural symbol. The psychological impact of the interrogation extended far beyond the walls of the chamber. even if you were eventually released, the trauma would stay with you. The memory of the questions, the threats, the pain, and the feeling of utter helplessness would haunt your dreams. You would forever be marked, your reputation tarnished, your trust in others shattered. It's the kind of experience that doesn't just change your life, it fundamentally alters who you are, leaving an indelible scar on your soul. The slow process of historical reckoning with the Inquisition's past continues to this day. Historians meticulously pore over the archives, trying to understand the nuances of its operations, the motivations of its actors, and the true extent of its human cost. This ongoing effort to confront the past is a crucial part of understanding modern Spain and its complex relationship with its own history. The Inquisitors would often use leading questions, designed to elicit the answers they wanted to hear. They would present scenarios, suggest interpretations of your actions, and guide you towards a confession that fit their preconceived notions of your guilt. It was less about discovery and more about confirmation, a process of forcing reality to conform to their desired narrative. You'd feel your words being twisted, your intentions misrepresented, until you no longer recognized your own story. The final abolition of the Inquisition was a victory for liberal ideas and a step towards a more modern, secular state. However, it did not instantly erase centuries of ingrained fear and social conditioning. The habits of conformity, the distrust of dissent, and the lingering prejudices continue to shape Spanish society in myriad ways. It's like trying to straighten a tree that has been bent by the wind for centuries. Even after the wind stops, the tree retains its curve, and as the session finally ends and you are dragged back to the darkness of your cell, you are left with the echoes of their voices, the phantom pains in your limbs, and the crushing weight of your own thoughts. The art of interrogation, in the hands of the Inquisition, was a masterpiece of misery designed to break the human spirit and force it into submission. You are just a canvas for their brutal artistry, and the colors they paint are fear, pain, and despair. The memory of the Inquisition serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of religious extremism, unchecked power, and the systematic suppression of human rights. It stands as a historical warning, a testament to how easily a noble intention, the pursuit of religious purity, can devolve into an engine of widespread misery and oppression. You might find yourself reflecting on this, even in your own time, seeing echoes of similar patterns in different contexts. A chilling reminder that the past in many ways is never truly past. You've survived the chilling grip of the secret prison and the mind-bending torment of interrogation, perhaps confessing to sins you never committed, just to escape the agony. Now you are about to witness the culmination of the Inquisition's power, a spectacle designed to instill fear and enforce conformity on a grand scale. You are about to experience the auto da fe, a public ceremony of faith, judgment, and chilling punishment, a theatrical display of power that would burn itself into the collective memory of Spain. The Spanish Inquisition, in its long and terrifying existence, made life miserable for countless individuals, families, and communities. It cast a shadow over an entire nation, stifling intellectual growth, fostering paranoia, and leaving deep, lasting scars. Its formal end in 1834 was a significant moment, a turning point in Spanish history. But the echoes of its power, the habits of mind it instilled, and the social divisions it created, continued to resonate for generations, a quiet, unsettling hum beneath the surface of modern Spain. You are left with the profound understanding that some miseries, once inflicted, have a way of lingering, shaping the world long after their direct cause has faded into history. And now, as the story of the Spanish Inquisition comes to a close, let those terrifying images fade into the darkness. Let the whispers of doubt, the screams of pain, and the fires of retribution recede into the past. You have come a long way, seeing what men can do to each other in the name of faith, and the lingering effects of fanaticism. Take a deep breath and feel the peace of the night envelop you. The ghosts of the past have been told, and now it is time to rest. Let your mind drift into a deep sleep, undisturbed by the cold echoes of history. The day of the auto da fe dawns, often heralded by the ringing of church bells, not in celebration, but in a solemn, foreboding peal. The entire city seems to stir, drawn by a mixture of morbid curiosity, genuine religious fervor, and an unspoken, terrifying obligation. you find yourself swept along with the crowds, moving towards the main square or a specially constructed platform outside the city walls. The air is thick with anticipation, a strange blend of excitement and dread, like attending a very important, very depressing public execution. The auto da fe, literally act of faith, was not just a burning at the stake, as is often popularly imagined. It was a complex, multi-day, and meticulously choreographed religious ceremony. The burning was only the final, most extreme act, reserved for the unrepentant or those who had relapsed into heresy. For many, it was a public penance, a ritual of humiliation and reintegration, albeit one that left indelible scars. It's like a very elaborate high school graduation ceremony, except instead of diplomas, some people get a lifetime of shame, and others get, well, a much hotter experience. You stand among the throng, jostling for a better view. The square is adorned with religious banners, and a large scaffold or platform has been erected, draped in black cloth. Rows of seats are reserved for the nobility, the clergy, and the inquisitors themselves, who sit in solemn judgment, their faces unreadable. The atmosphere is charged, a palpable tension hanging in the air, as everyone waits for the procession to begin. A common historical fact about the auto da fe is its role as a public spectacle of deterrence. It was designed to be seen by as many people as possible, to serve as a stark warning against heresy and dissent. The public nature of the ceremony was crucial. It reinforced the power of the Inquisition and the absolute authority of the church and crown. Imagine a giant billboard, but instead of advertising soda, it's advertising the consequences of thinking for yourself. Then, the procession begins. First come the various religious orders, carrying banners and crosses, chanting solemn hymns. Their voices echo in the square, adding to the somber mood. Then come the penitents, the accused, dressed in distinctive garments that mark their crimes. You see them, shuffling slowly, their heads bowed, their faces often pale and drawn from their time in prison. The most recognizable garment is the San Benito, a yellow tunic adorned with symbols of their heresy. For those who had confessed and were to be reconciled, the San Benito might have crosses or flames pointing downwards, signifying their repentance. But for those condemned to death, the San Benito would be painted with terrifying images of demons and flames pointing upwards, a chilling visual prophecy of their fate. You might spot a neighbor, a face you recognize, now reduced to a figure of public shame, wearing this grotesque uniform. It's a bit like a very, very unfortunate fashion show, where the outfits are designed to make you wish you were invisible. An obscure detail about the auto da fe is the elaborate sermon that was often delivered during the ceremony. This wasn't just a brief homily, it was a lengthy, impassioned discourse, sometimes lasting for hours, delivered by a prominent theologian or inquisitor. The sermon would detail the evils of heresy, extol the virtues of orthodoxy, and justify the actions of the Holy Office. It was a powerful piece of propaganda, designed to reinforce the Inquisition's narrative and to ensure that the public understood the theological necessity of the proceedings. Imagine sitting through a sermon so long. You start to question your own existence, let alone your religious beliefs. As the penitents are paraded before the crowds, their sentences are read aloud. For some, it's a public flogging, a painful but temporary humiliation. For others, it's a period of imprisonment, or forced labor, or the confiscation of their property. Their names, their crimes, and their sentences are announced for all to hear, ensuring that their shame is publicly recorded and widely known. You hear the names, the accusations, and you realize that these are not just abstract concepts. These are real people, whose lives are being irrevocably shattered before your very eyes. The most terrifying moment comes when the sentences of those condemned to death are read. These are the relaxed to the secular arm, meaning the Inquisition, as a religious body, did not directly carry out executions. Instead, they relaxed the condemned to the civil authorities, knowing full well that the secular arm would then burn them at the stake. This was a legalistic loophole, allowing the Inquisition to maintain its claim of not shedding blood, while effectively sentencing people to a horrific death. It's a bit like saying, I didn't push him off the cliff, I just pointed him towards the edge and wished him well. A common historical fact about inquisitorial interrogations is the reliance on anonymous testimony. This was a cornerstone of their legal process. Witnesses would provide their denunciations in secret, and their names would be withheld from the accused. This practice, while ostensibly to protect informers from retaliation, effectively stripped the accused of any meaningful defense. Imagine trying to prove your innocence when you don't know who said what about you, or even what exactly they said. You're fighting ghosts, and they're all armed with damning accusations. The condemned, often gagged to prevent them from speaking heresy or protesting their innocence, are then led away to the quemadero, the burning place, usually just outside the city. The sight of the pyres, already prepared, sends a fresh wave of terror through the crowd. The smell of wood smoke, mingling with the scent of fear, hangs heavy in the air. You might try to avert your gaze, but a perverse fascination, or the pressure of the crowd, keeps your eyes fixed on the unfolding horror. You're standing there, perhaps haggling over the price of some olives, when a hush falls over the market. It's not the sudden silence that comes from a street performer finishing their act, but a heavy, oppressive quiet, like the world itself is holding its breath. Heads turned, not towards a procession or a celebration, but towards a group of figures, cloaked and somber, moving with an unnerving purpose. These are the first tendrils of the Spanish Inquisition, an institution born from a fervent desire for religious purity, yet destined to become an engine of fear and misery. The burnings were slow and agonizing. The condemned were often tied to a stake, and the fire was built around them. The goal was not a quick death, but a prolonged and terrifying one, meant to serve as the ultimate deterrent. The screams, if they could be heard over the crackling of the flames and the murmur of the crowd, would haunt your nightmares for years to come. It's a visceral, horrifying experience, a stark reminder of the ultimate price of defiance. At its heart, the Inquisition was conceived as a tool to ensure religious orthodoxy within the Catholic kingdoms of Spain. The year is 1478, and Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, the Catholic monarchs, are consolidating their power. They envision a unified Spain, not just politically, but spiritually. For centuries, Spain had been a land of three faiths: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism coexisting, sometimes uneasily, but often with a surprising degree of cultural exchange. But the winds of change are blowing, and they carry the scent of intolerance. The monarchs, having recently conquered Granada and completed the Reconquista, are now turning their attention inward. They suspect that many conversos Jews who had converted to Christianity, often under duress and moriscos, Muslims who had converted were secretly practicing their old faiths. And this, in their eyes, was a grave threat to the spiritual and political unity of their burgeoning empire. The auto da fe was a carefully orchestrated piece of theater, designed to maximize its impact. Every detail, from the order of the procession to the timing of the sermon, was meticulously planned. The participation of various civic and religious leaders lent an air of legitimacy and solemnity to the proceedings, ensuring that the message of absolute conformity was delivered with maximum authority. It was a terrifyingly effective piece of public relations. If your public relations strategy involves burning people alive, so you find yourself living in a society where your very soul is under scrutiny. It's not enough to simply attend Mass. You must truly believe and demonstrate that belief in every facet of your life. Imagine the constant self-monitoring. Did you eat pork today? Did you light candles on Friday evening? Did you wash your hands in a particular way? Every mundane act, every family tradition, every casual conversation could be twisted into evidence of heresy. It's like living in a reality show where the judges are invisible, omniscient, and prone to extreme overreactions. And the prize for losing, well, let's just say it wasn't a vacation to the Canary Islands.